In March 2002, 5 frames of a video from a security camera at the Pentagon were released or possibly leaked as small BMP images. The first of those frames purportedly showed the Pentagon plane. The remaining frames showed the growing fireball. Whatever was crossing the Pentagon lawn was in the distant background of a wide-angle shot and mostly hidden by a foreground obstruction, a post that, as it turned out, housed a second identical security camera. The most obvious feature of whatever was crossing the lawn was a white smoke trail that was hard to interpret. If there was a plane, why was there a smoke trail? Planes don't emit smoky exhaust. Missiles do. Also, how could a large plane, such as a 757, hide behind the small post in the foreground? The tail of the plane was visible, but without more context, it was difficult to identify it as the tail of a large plane. This image fueled speculation that the actual impacting object was a small plane or a missile. Compounding the confusion, the picture had an erroneous timestamp, added later during copying of the file, it turned out. It was not in the original. The lack of context and the small image size did more to sow confusion than shed light on what hit the Pentagon. 2 longer videos shot at 1 frame per second from the same camera and a second camera mounted in the foreground post were released in 2006 in response to a Freedom of Information Act request for surveillance videos that may have captured the incoming plane at or near the Pentagon on 9/11. One of these included the original 5 frames. Many people viewing these as still frames over the years, myself included, failed to see the plane. The lack of a clear visual image of the plane stirred speculation about what, if anything, actually hit the Pentagon. By the time the 2 longer videos were released in 2006, no plane at the Pentagon speculation was well established to the point that this belief was virtually synonymous with the 9/11 truth movement in many people's minds. There is a technique used in astronomy for seeing details in cluttered photographs. Imagine a star field photographed with a telescope, then photographed again the next day or several days later. How could you tell if one of those tiny dots was actually a distant undiscovered planet? Unlike the stars that remain fixed, a distant planet would move. The problem is how to recognize the motion of a tiny dot in a cluttered field. Or what if you were looking for stars that vary in brightness? This is something astronomers study. But how do you go about finding the variable stars? Here are simulations of 2 photographs of the same star field taken a few days apart. The problem is to find if anything has moved or changed in brightness. One technique astronomers developed long ago is to use a device called a blink comparator. It allows you to alternate the view back and forth between 2 photographs. Let's try it. Do you see the planet moving? Do you see the variable star? You probably were able to see them immediately. Your eyes are attuned to noticing changes, so what changes stands out. This technique, by the way, was how Pluto was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh back in 1930. The image of the Pentagon plane is similar to the astronomical problem in the sense that we are looking for something against a cluttered background, and we don't know exactly what to look for. Ken Jenkins showed me that the blink technique is useful for seeing the Pentagon plane. So I implemented a JavaScript routine to blink full-resolution images on my website. But the same thing can be accomplished as a rapid-fire slideshow recorded as a standard video. Take a little time and examine the blinked images. Here's a zoomed-in view. What we see is fuzzy because we're enlarging a tiny pixelated image. I think you can see there is something that actually looks like the fuselage of a plane to the left of the smoke cloud. You can see the tail sticking up to the skyline. Now let's do the same for the frames from the other camera. Here the most obvious feature is the tail sticking up to the sky. You can also barely distinguish the nose of the plane to the left of the obstruction. Here's another blink comparison using 1 frame from each camera, showing the movement of the plane in the time interval between the 2 exposures. Note that the plane is both crossing our field of view and coming toward us, so the size changes. Also, the 2 cameras have slightly different points of view. Notice the details in the smoke trail. The undulations along the bottom edge of the short smoke trail can be seen in the longer smoke trail as well. The longer smoke trail is an extension of the trail that's already there. Notice how far the plane has moved in the time interval between the two exposures. The two cameras were recorded on the same recording device, so they were not simultaneous exposures. The film The New Pearl Harbor assumes without justification that the offset time between the two videos was 1/30th of a second. There's a pickup truck owned by Mickey Bell, one of the workers in the Pentagon refurbishment project, that is visible after the fireball. Wayne Costi has determined, based on measurements of the movement of the truck, that the time delay from one camera to the other was actually 4/30ths of a second. He did this by comparing how far the truck moved between two frames of the same camera, which is a 1-second interval, with the distance it moved in the offset time between the two cameras. Notice that the plane moves a little less than its own length in that time. Based on the length of a 757-200, Wayne estimates that the distance moved was about 106 feet, so the speed works out to be 542 miles per hour, which is in the ballpark with other measurements of the speed of the plane, but this measurement is independent of any other speed measurements. One issue that may bother you a little is how stubby the plane looks in these images. A 757 is long and slender. The plane is coming toward us at an angle, but it still doesn't look quite right. The plane is distorted because, as we can see looking at the wider picture, the whole view is distorted by the wide-angle camera lens. Note how the roofline of the Pentagon is curved outward. This is called barrel distortion. A number of image processing programs, like Photoshop, have the ability to correct for this distortion. I'm using an alternative program called GIMP. GIMP provides a slider to balance barrel distortion with the opposite effect, which is called pincushion distortion. Simply adjust the slider until lines that are supposed to be straight are shown to be straight. The result is the borders of the image are given severe pincushion distortion, but the image itself is flattened. This correction stretches out objects near the edge of the field, which were compressed in the original distorted view, so the plane looks more elongated. It's starting to actually look like a 757. Another question that may be lingering in your mind is, why is there a smoke trail? A number of explanations have been suggested. The right engine of the plane had moments before gouged the top of a tree on the overpass near the first light pole, leaving a circular gouge in the foliage with stripped stems remaining. The smoke we are seeing can be explained as the burning foliage in the right engine on the far side of the plane, which is what hit the tree. If we return to the image of the plane in the original 5 frames leaked out in early 2002, we can see that the original frames are identical to the corresponding frames in the longer version released several years later. There's no sign of tampering. If they were trying to sell the public on the presence of a plane that wasn't really there, they did a bad job of it. The smoke trail was not a selling point. It was a huge counterpoint to their message. The extreme subtlety of the plane image against the cluttered background, requiring special techniques to even see it, is not what one would expect of a propaganda piece. Also, as we've seen, there was complex interrelated information in the images, such as the motion of Mickey Bell's truck correctly corresponding to the speed of the plane, and the distortion of the plane image that was removed when the overall camera distortion was corrected. These self-consistent elements argue for the authenticity of the images. The bottom line is we have good reason to believe that we are actually seeing a large, fast-moving plane approaching and impacting the Pentagon on 9/11.